Okay, let's start our today's topic. Today we are going to discuss menstrual cycle. It is in continuation with the previous lecture. In the previous lecture, we had discussed it as two phases: proliferative phase, ovulatory phase, and we were discussing luteal phase or progestational phase. We had discussed in luteal phase or progestational phase that after ovulation, empty graphene follicle is changed first into corpus luteum under the influence of luteinizing hormone. Corpus luteum was fully formed on 19th day of menstrual cycle. Then corpus luteum acted as an endocrine gland and it released progesterone and estrogens. Progesterone and estrogens, they acted on the female reproductive tract. They stimulated the growth and development of cilia in the fallopian tubes. They stimulated the growth of uterine endometrium. They also stimulated the growth of uterine glands in the uterine endometrium, and they also made the uterine endometrium rich in blood vessels. So it made the uterine endometrium highly vascular, right? So these changes we have already discussed. Now two conditions arise in this phase, in luteal phase or progestational phase. Now there are two conditions. If the ovum is fertilized, if the ovum is fertilized, since the ovum has been released in the ovulatory phase on the 15th day of menstrual cycle, right? Now that ovum is still surviving, and that is in the luteal phase or in this progestational phase that is surviving, right? Now, if the ovum gets fertilized, then what will happen? And if the ovum is not fertilized, then what will happen? Now, there are two conditions: if the ovum is fertilized and if the ovum is not fertilized. So, if the ovum is fertilized, it will lead to the start of pregnancy. Start of pregnancy. If the ovum gets fertilized, it will change into zygote. Zygote will undergo cleavage divisions. It will change into morula. Morula will change into blastula. Blastula will change into blastocyst. And that blastocyst will get implanted. And the embryonic development starts, right? So that happens when the ovum is fertilized. So when pregnancy occurs, at that time, there is no menstrual phase. During the pregnancy, there is no menstrual phase. Then menstrual cycle will not occur, right? However, if the ovum is not fertilized, then there will be no implantation. Then the fourth phase, menstrual phase, will occur, right? Menstrual phase will start. So there are two conditions in luteal phase or progestational phase. If the ovum is fertilized, then pregnancy will start. What will happen during the process of in this process of pregnancy? As the ovum gets fertilized, this ovum after fertilization, when it gets fertilized, it will change into zygote. This zygote will change by cleavage division. It will undergo cleavage division and it will change into morula. Morula will then change into blastula. Blastula will then change into blastocyst. Blastocyst. And this blastocyst gets implanted. It gets implanted. It gets attached on uterus. On uterus. Right? So development of embryo will start. Embryo formation will start. Right? So when the blastocyst gets implanted, a placenta is formed. When the blastocyst gets implanted, a placenta is formed. Placenta is formed. When blastocyst gets implanted, a placenta is formed. As soon as placenta formation begins, it releases a hormone known as HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. HCG, right? Or it is also written as HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. Human chorionic gonadotropin. So when the ovum is fertilized, it changes first into zygote, zygote changes into morula, morula into blastula, blastula into blastocyst. Then this blastocyst gets implanted. As the blastocyst gets implanted, it leads to the formation of placenta, right? When the placenta formation begins, as soon as placenta formation begins, this placenta starts secreting HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. And this human chorionic gonadotropin, it maintains corpus luteum. It maintains corpus luteum. And when corpus luteum is maintained, it continues. It continues secretion of progesterone, and estrogen. And estrogen. It continues secretion of progesterone and estrogen. These progesterone and estrogens, they maintain uterine endometrium. They don't allow the uterine endometrium to suffer breakdown, right? So they maintain uterine endometrium, and by that, placenta formation continues and the pregnancy is carried on. So it maintains pregnancy. They will maintain pregnancy. These progesterone and estrogens, they will maintain the pregnancy. And this pregnancy will continue for a period of 9 months. So during these period of 9 months in which the pregnancy is occurring, in which the pregnancy is maintained, right? There will be no menstrual cycle. Do you understand what I'm saying? So menstrual cycle, whether it happens or not, it depends upon the fertilization of the ovum. If the ovum is fertilized, it will change into zygote. Zygote will then change into morula. Morula will change into blastula. Blastula will change into blastocyst. This blastocyst will get implanted into the uterus, right? As the blastocyst gets implanted, as the blastocyst gets attached on the uterine wall, placenta formation begins. As the placenta formation begins, this placenta secretes a hormone HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. This human chorionic gonadotropin, it maintains corpus luteum. It keeps corpus luteum intact, right? And corpus luteum continues to produce progesterone and estrogen. Corpus luteum continues to produce progesterone and estrogens. And these progesterone and estrogens, they continue to maintain uterine endometrium. They continue to maintain the placenta formation, right? So in this way, placenta formation will be completed, right? And pregnancy will be maintained. So this is the first condition in the luteal phase or progestational phase, right? So when placenta is formed, placenta is formed completely within 10 weeks. Placenta is completely formed within 10 weeks. So when placenta is fully formed, then placenta itself produces progesterone and estrogens. When placenta itself is formed completely, it starts secretion of progesterone and estrogen. Now placenta secretes progesterone and estrogens. Progesterone and estrogens. So far, corpus luteum was producing progesterone and estrogens. And in the meanwhile, placenta developed. When the placenta is fully formed in 10 weeks or during 3 months, right? Then placenta secretes progesterone and estrogens. And these progesterone and estrogens, they maintain uterine endometrium. They maintain uterine endometrium. Endometrium. So they maintain the pregnancy. They maintain the pregnancy for the remaining period of the gestation, right? So when when placenta starts secretion of progesterone and estrogens, right? Now corpus luteum degenerates. Now corpus luteum degenerates. Now corpus luteum degenerates. This corpus luteum gets degenerated. Why corpus luteum now degenerates? The function of corpus luteum was to produce progesterone and estrogens, right? So it continues for secretion of progesterone and estrogens up to 10 weeks. During these 10 weeks, now placenta is formed. As the placenta is formed completely, now placenta produces itself progesterone and estrogens. So corpus luteum is not needed now. So corpus luteum degenerates, and this corpus luteum, after 10 weeks, it changes into corpus albicans. It changes into corpus albicans. So it gets degenerated. It gets degenerated. Now this placenta itself maintains the pregnancy, right? So this is the first condition. This is the first condition in luteal phase or progestational phase, right? So in this phase, when the ovum is fertilized, blastocyst is formed, blastocyst gets implanted, placenta is formed, placenta releases HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, it maintains corpus luteum. Corpus luteum continues to secrete progesterone and estrogens. This progesterone and estrogens, they maintain the pregnancy, they stimulate the formation of placenta. Then within a period of 10 weeks, placenta is fully formed. When placenta is fully formed, then placenta secretes progesterone and estrogens. And now corpus luteum starts degenerating because now corpus luteum is not needed, right? So when corpus luteum degenerates, it changes into corpus albicans, a scar tissue. And now its function is taken over by placenta itself. And placenta maintains the pregnancy for the remaining period of time, right? So this is one condition. This is one condition. Now, if the ovum is not fertilized, then what will happen? We will see that. If the ovum is not fertilized, now second condition, if the ovum is not fertilized, then it leads to the onset of menstrual phase. When or if the ovum is not fertilized. Now, if the ovum is not fertilized, what will happen? There will be no placenta. When ovum is not fertilized, right? No zygote is formed, no blastula, no morula, no blastocyst, no implantation, and no placenta, right? So when there is no placenta, this corpus luteum, it fails to be maintained. Corpus luteum is not maintained. What maintains corpus luteum? When fertilization had occurred, corpus luteum was maintained by HCG produced by placenta. Now, since no placenta is formed, so there is no HCG, and corpus luteum is not maintained, so it degenerates. So when corpus luteum degenerates, levels of progesterone and estrogen, levels of progesterone, levels of progesterone and estrogens decline sharply in blood. So levels of progesterone and estrogens, they fall in blood, right? They get low. So because of these low levels of progesterone and estrogen in blood, now now uterine endometrium is not maintained. And that uterine endometrium starts breakdown. Do you now understand why uterine endometrium starts breakdown? So when ovum is not fertilized, there is no zygote, there is no morula, there is no blastula, there is no blastocyst, there is no implantation. And when there is no implantation, there is no placenta. So there is no HCG, right? It was HCG hormone which maintained corpus luteum for 10 weeks, right? Due to absence of HCG, due to absence of human chorionic gonadotropin. Now corpus luteum is not maintained. So when corpus luteum is not maintained, it starts degenerating. And progesterone and estrogen levels, they suddenly fall in blood, right? Due to low levels of progesterone and estrogen in blood, uterine endometrium is not maintained. And this leads to the onset of the menstrual cycle. Because of low levels of progesterone and estrogens, now uterine endometrium, it will start degenerating. And that starts the fourth phase of menstrual cycle, that is known as the menstrual phase. Now we will see what happens in menstrual phase. Now menstrual phase. This phase, as I told you, it lasts for only 3 to 4 days. It generally lasts for 3 to 4 days. That means this phase, it starts on the first day of menstrual cycle and continues up to fourth day of menstrual cycle. This phase starts on the first day of menstrual cycle. So when the bleeding occurs, that is the first day. So from first day, it continues up to fourth day of menstrual cycle. So it remains for a period of just 3 to 4 days, right? So in this phase, bleeding occurs. In this phase, bleeding occurs. Why bleeding occurs in this phase? As I told you just now, when the corpus luteum is not maintained, progesterone and estrogens are not secreted. Levels of progesterone and estrogen, they suddenly fall in blood due to low levels of progesterone and estrogen. Due to low levels of progesterone and estrogen. Progesterone and estrogens in blood. Due to low levels of progesterone and estrogens in blood. Uterine endometrium. Uterine endometrium. Uterine endometrium. Status breakdown. Status breakdown. Status breaking down, right? It suffers breakdown. So this uterine endometrium, which was rich in glands and blood vessels, so when it starts breaking down, when it starts to suffers lysis. Lysis means breakdown. So when it suffers lysis, breakdown, the blood vessels they rupture. Blood vessels rupture, and due to rupture of blood vessels, bleeding occurs. Bleeding occurs, and this blood it starts flowing out of the female reproductive system. This blood starts flowing out of female reproductive system. This blood, along with unfertilized ovum and some ruptured tissues of the uterine endometrium, when it flows out from the female reproductive system, this flow of blood is known as menses. This flow of blood is known as menses. So that is why we call it as menstrual cycle, because blood flows out of this female reproductive system, right? Due to non-fertilization of the ovum, right? So this is because of low levels of progesterone and estrogens. I will repeat it again, right? So I told you if the ovum remains unfertilized, right? When ovum remains unfertilized, morula is not formed, blastula is not formed, blastocyst is not formed, implantation doesn't occur, placenta is not formed. So there is no human chorionic gonadotropin. HCG is not produced. When there is no HCG, corpus luteum is not maintained. Corpus luteum hormone, this endocrine gland is not maintained. So when corpus luteum is not maintained, the level of progesterone and estrogens in blood, they start falling down. Because these two hormones, progesterone and estrogens, they were produced by corpus luteum. Now when corpus luteum is not maintained, when corpus luteum degenerates, there is decrease in the secretion of progesterone and estrogen, and in blood levels of progesterone and estrogens, they fall down. These progesterone and estrogens, they maintained uterine endometrium. They kept uterine endometrium intact. Due to their low secretion, due to their fall in the blood circulation, uterine endometrium is not maintained. Uterine endometrium is not maintained. And uterine endometrium starts breakdown. It starts breaking down. It starts lysis, right? So when uterine endometrium breaks down, it was rich in blood vessels, it was rich in glands, right? So those blood vessels, they rupture along with the uterine endometrium, right? So when blood vessels rupture, blood bleeding occurs. When blood vessels rupture, bleeding occurs. This blood then starts flowing out from the female reproductive system, along with the unfertilized ovum and the ruptured tissues of uterine endometrium. So this flow of blood along with unfertilized ovum and ruptured tissues of the uterine endometrium. This flow of blood is known as menses, right? And when menses occurs, we say menstrual cycle begins, right? As I told you earlier in the very first lecture, that this is the first phase of menstrual cycle. But for the sake of convenience, we discuss it at the last, right? So menses occurs, right? This menses, it is also known as weeping of uterus for the lost ovum. This menses is also known as weeping of uterus weeping of uterus for the ovum lost, for the ovum lost, right? Uterus had prepared itself for the process of implantation. Uterus has undergone changes. The thickness of uterine endometrium had increased so that it can receive the blastocyst, so that implantation could occur. Now, when the ovum is not fertilized, blastocyst is not formed. This blastocyst is not implanted, and the preparations of the uterus they go waste, right? Then this uterine endometrium breaks down, right? And for that reason, we say that this uterus is now weeping for the ovum lost. Weeping of uterus for the ovum lost. So uterus is now weeping because it has lost the ovum, because the ovum was not fertilized. Or it is also known as funeral, funeral of the unfertilized ovum. This menstrual period, this menses, it is also known as funeral of the unfertilized ovum. The unfertilized ovum, it is now lost. It gets waste, right? So this loss of unfertilized ovum, along with blood, it is known as funeral of the unfertilized ovum. Funeral means janaza, right? So it is the janaza of lost ovum, right? So that is why we call this menstrual cycle as weeping of uterus for the ovum lost, or we also call it as funeral of the unfertilized ovum, right? So how much blood is lost during this menstrual cycle? As I told you, the phase may remain for 3 or 4 days. During these 3 or 4 days, some 50 to 80 ml of blood is lost. This is the normal range, right? Some females they lose less blood. Some females they lose a lot of blood, right? So average is 50 to 80 ml of blood is lost during these 3 4 days, right? Now, after the loss of blood, the levels of progesterone and estrogen they have declined in the blood. Now this starts a positive feedback. Decrease in levels of progesterone and estrogen in blood. It generates a positive feedback. These low levels of progesterone and estrogen in the blood, they are monitored by the hypothalamus. They are perceived by hypothalamus. Decrease in progesterone and estrogen levels is perceived by hypothalamus. And hypothalamus immediately generates a feedback. Generates a feedback. Hypothalamus immediately generates a feedback. Hypothalamus now starts releasing of gonadotropin releasing hormone. When hypothalamus perceives fall in progesterone and estrogen levels in blood, hypothalamus starts release of gonadotropin releasing hormone. This gonadotropin releasing hormone, it stimulates anterior pituitary. It stimulates anterior pituitary for release of follicle stimulating hormone. For release of follicle stimulating hormone. So when anterior pituitary will release follicle stimulating hormone, what is the function of follicle stimulating hormone? One ovum has been lost, right? Now follicle stimulating hormone, it stimulates growth of a primary ovarian follicle, a next primary ovarian follicle. It will stimulate its growth into a new Graafian follicle. New Graafian follicle. And another cycle will start, right? So as the levels of progesterone and estrogens decrease in the blood, this change is sensed by hypothalamus, right? Hypothalamus immediately starts positive feedback. Hypothalamus releases gonadotropin releasing hormones. These gonadotropin releasing hormones, they act on anterior pituitary. They stimulate the anterior pituitary for the release of follicle stimulating hormone. And follicle stimulating hormone starts the conversion of, it stimulates the development of a primary ovarian follicle into a Graafian follicle. So this will start the next menstrual cycle. Right? So in this way, this cycle is repeated after every 28 days if the ovum is not fertilized, right? However, if the ovum gets fertilized in the luteal phase, then pregnancy occurs, and in the process of pregnancy, embryo is formed, then that embryo turns into a fetus, and their pregnancy, gestation period continues for 280 days or 9 months. 280 days or 9 months. During these 280 days or 9 months of pregnancy, menstrual phase doesn't occur. During these days, menstrual phase doesn't occur, right? So in this menstrual phase, if the pregnancy does not occur, then menstrual phase will occur, and in this phase, a female will lose 80 to 50 to 80 ml of blood. Now, there are some females in which this menstrual cycle is repeated just after 21 days. As I told you earlier, this menstrual cycle, it has broad variations. In some females, it may be of 28 days. In some females, it may be of 35 days. In some females, it may be of 30 days. In some females, it may be of 32 days. Or the conditions vary, right? So there are some females in which menstrual cycle is of 21 days or less duration. There are some females in which the menstrual cycle is of 21 days duration or less than that. Those females are known as polymenoric females. That condition is known as polymenorrhea. And such females are known as polymenoric. So those females in which menstrual cycle is repeated just after 21 days or less than that, right? Those females are known as polymenoric females, and the condition is known as polymenorrhea. In some females, menstrual cycle is repeated after 35 days or more. There are some females in which menstrual cycle is repeated after 35 days or more. Such females are said to be oligomenoric. The condition is known as oligomenorrhea, and the females are said to be oligomenoric. Right? There are some females in which the menstrual cycle is repeated after 180 days or more. You see how much variations are there. In some females, the menstrual cycle is repeated. In some females, the menstrual cycle is repeated after 180 days or more. Such females are known as amenorrheic, or this condition is known as amenorrhea. Condition is known as amenorrhea, and such females are known as amenorrheic. So there are broad variations, right? And in some females during this menstrual cycle, some females suffer a loss of blood over 100 ml per cycle. Those females who suffer a blood loss of 100 ml per cycle, such females are known as hypermenorrhea. That condition is known as hypermenorrhea. Is it visible here?
Yes, sir.
If any female loses more than 100 ml of blood per cycle during 3-4 days, right? Such female is known as hypermenorrhea, or that condition is known as hypermenorrhea, right? So these are the variations which are associated with the menstrual cycle. Usually, menstrual cycle is repeated. Standard menstrual cycle is repeated after 28 days. There may be little variation. In some, the cycle may be repeated after 26 days. In some, the cycle may be repeated after 30 or 32 days. That is considered very much normal, right? But there are some females in which the cycle just occurs after 21 days, or sometimes less than 21 days. Such a female is said to be polymenoric female, and that condition is known as polymenorrhea. In some females, the cycle may be repeated after 35 days or more, right? Such females are known as oligomenoric females, or that condition is known as oligomenorrhea. In some females, the menstrual cycle is repeated after 180 days or more, right? If cycles are repeated after 180 days or more, Such females are said to be amenorrheic. That means they don't have menstrual cycle, right? Or that condition is known as amenorrhea. And in some females, there is excessive loss of blood. Those females which suffer excessive loss of blood, that means they lose over 100 ml blood during these 3-4 days during one cycle. Such condition is known as hypermenorrhea. Such condition is known as hypermenorrhea, or it is also known as menorrhagia. It is also known as menorrhagia. So for these conditions, a female must consult a gynecologist, and the underlying causes must be evaluated. Sometimes these conditions are associated with some abnormalities. Sometimes there are infections, sometimes there may be cysts in the ovary, there may be cysts in the uterus, right? Or sometimes there may be deficiency of hormones. So for these reasons, a female must definitely consult a gynecologist, and she must get evaluated for this variation, these broad variations in the menstrual cycle. So that is all about the menstrual cycle. Hope you have understood it. Any questions, any doubts?
No, sir.
Shall we move ahead then? So that was all about menstrual cycle, right? Now, after menstrual cycle,
Yes, sir.
we are now going to start reproductive health. Actually, I have given you the link in the morning about reproductive health. Then I later realized that I have not completed this menstrual cycle. Now we will start next topic, that is reproductive health. I think we are running out of time. Our time has ended. Let me see what is the time. Sorry, our time is over, right? So we will discuss reproductive health tomorrow. If you have any doubt, if you have any doubt or any questions, you can also send me your questions on the WhatsApp. You can have my WhatsApp number from the group, right? If there are any doubts. Okay. Okay, thank you for being with me. Thank you.